April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Caen, France, German ace Oberleutnant Ralph Hermeken watched through his Focke-Wulf 190 canopy as ungainly silhouettes climbed laboriously toward his formation. "They've sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, unable to suppress his laughter. Below, 16 Republic P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward in tight formation. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney engines strained against 7-ton weight. To Luftwaffe, pilots accustomed to sleek Spitfires and nimble Soviet fighters, these corpulent American machines appeared almost comical. Barrel-shaped fuselages topped with greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed too small for their massive bodies, propellers that dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. The German pilots circled like wolves above, positioning for attack. What they didn't know would cost them everything. I'm William, and this is the story of how German laughter turned to terror, how flying milk bottles became instruments of annihilation, how 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare. This is the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the weapon that systematically destroyed the Luftwaffe. The P-47 Thunderbolt had emerged from a June 1940 panic. As German fighters swept across France, Republic Aviation's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli, received urgent specifications. The Army wanted a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the Luftwaffe's best. What Kartveli designed instead was a monster. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his design team, "but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor. The massive turbo supercharger system, with its complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave it an almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time invariably asked the same question. This thing actually flies. Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The Pratt and Whitney R2800 Double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters gasped for air. The turbo supercharger delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere, where conventional superchargers failed. Major Hubert Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in early combat. It ground-looped on landing, torque-rolled on takeoff, and dove with such enthusiasm that pilots discovered compressibility, their controls freezing as shock waves formed on the wings. But those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary, power beyond imagination. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, who had become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat encounters in April and May 1943 confirmed every German prejudice. The P-47s couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109s, couldn't match their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Hauptmann Josef Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter. The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them fat targets. The statistics seem to confirm German confidence. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The RAF, observing from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested the Americans might reconsider their choice of mount. But something strange was happening that German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes. Damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. More significantly, when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergence zone of destruction that German pilots had never experienced. 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute, enough concentrated firepower to saw a fighter in half in less than 2 seconds. The event that would begin changing German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Laval, France. It involved Second Lieutenant Robert Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron, and an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's formation of 8 P-47s was returning from escort duty when they were bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagerschwader 26. The Germans executed a perfect attack, diving from the sun with overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear, was caught in crossfire. 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit. The engine cowling was torn away, and fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel, tried to bail out. The canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, Johnson managed to level the aircraft. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190 discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load. Then the German repositioned and fired again, this time with only his machine guns, the cannon ammunition exhausted. The German pilot pulled alongside, staring in disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly. Young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something approaching fear. The German repositioned and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal salute, and peeled away, presumably out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 had survived the impossible. Johnson's P-47 landed at Manston with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. 3 of the 4 main structural spars were shot through. Yet the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence receiving combat reports initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially seen as a disadvantage, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical dive. This speed could be converted to altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Mahurin developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic. P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting impossible for defending Germans. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead. The combined firepower created an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Garbreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. The Germans were discovering the true meaning of American firepower. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality. The P-47's performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged Double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. German fighters relying on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers saw their performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf. Johnson's combat report was clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both Eastern and Western fronts, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? In January 1944, a new variant began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades 13 feet in diameter. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb." We bounced a formation near Hanover. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year. The Paddle-Blade Propeller changed more than performance, it changed the sound. The distinctive thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone. A deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried two 108-gallon wing tanks, extending range to over 1,000 miles. With the paddle-blade propeller, Thunderbolts could fight immediately after dropping tanks. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties in spring 1944, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition began in earnest in April as the Allies prepared for invasion. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst put 160 projectiles into a target, but it was the addition of bombs and rockets that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry two 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage. Later variants added 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader 2, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our Gruppe. I was the only one to return." In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks, and 4,553 vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At one airfield, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured German pilot pointed at the burning aircraft and taunted. "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking's response became legendary. He pointed to the flight line where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47s filled the flight line. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte, including many irreplaceable instructors. These losses they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. In March 1945, Oberstleutnant Josef Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials. His statement, deemed too demoralizing for publication, revealed the complete transformation in German attitudes. "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built," Priller stated. "Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. But beyond the machine is what it represents. Unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, it's gone forever." We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Airfields were cratered ruins. German pilots developed what medical officers called jubbo fever, physical symptoms of stress appearing when thunderbolts were reported in the area. The distinctive thunder of approaching thunderbolts caused panic among ground troops who knew that survival meant finding cover immediately. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions against P-47s. The psychological impact was complete. The final statistics of P-47 operations defied comprehension. In Europe alone, 3,752 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 3,315 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 86,000 railway cars destroyed, 9,000 locomotives destroyed, 68,000 trucks destroyed. Standing here now, examining the legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt, we witness how industrial logic defeated tactical brilliance, how quantity and quality merged into overwhelming superiority. The transformation took less than 2 years. The flying milk bottle became the most feared aircraft in Luftwaffe experience.